Hello everyone, hope all is well with you and your loved ones. My name is Payman Montakhebi. I'm an electrical engineer licensed in Canada and US, living in beautiful Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I practice design for electrical systems for power distribution for private and utility, entire building systems design, industrial facilities, and roadway and street lighting. This is my second educational video and I hope you enjoyed the first one. In my last video, we talked about safety code systems in Alberta and learned that the codes are developed pursuant to the provincial law, they must be complied with by all parties involved, and violator of a code is guilty of an offense for which the penalty could include fine, imprisonment, or both. We also talked about the primary codes that the electrical engineers and designers practicing building systems design should be knowledgeable of. However, electrical engineers and designers do not constantly practice building systems design. In this video, we'll talk about two other codes that are applicable to other fields of electrical engineering design. Before getting into the details of our conversation, let me to first thank everyone for doing your part to make our journey through the COVID-19 pandemic a safer one. I'm grateful for your kindness and thoughtfulness. Some of you may have already heard of or may use one or both of these codes. The first one we're going to discuss today is the Alberta Electrical Utility Code, and the other one is Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities. The Alberta Electrical Utility Code is in its 5th edition. It was published in 2016 and was declared to be in force on May 1st, 2017. The Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities is also in its 5th edition. It was published in 2015 and was declared to be in force from January 1st, 2016 to January 31st, 2019. This code has been discontinued. You may think, why are we talking about a discontinued code? Please bear with me for a few minutes. We'll chat about it later in this session. But before diving into the details, I would like to mention that although this presentation appears to be prepared for electrical engineers and designers, it's equally helpful to construction managers, developers, electricians, and other stakeholders involved in construction, operation, and maintenance of power distribution, roadway and street lighting, and oil and gas facilities. The Alberta Electrical Utility Code is developed by the Safety Codes Council with considerable contribution by the utility companies and industry's experts. The first edition of this code was titled Alberta Electrical and Communication Utility Code and was published in 1999. It was at its 3rd edition when its name was shortened to the Alberta Electrical Utility Code. The reason was that by then the communication utilities went under federal jurisdiction and therefore were excluded from the scope of this provincial code. However, communication systems owned by electric utilities for the sole purpose of the operation of the electric utility system remained under the scope of this code. The Alberta Electrical Utility Code applies to the construction, maintenance, and replacement of electrical utility systems that are used to transform, transmit, distribute, and deliver electricity to consumer services and street and roadway lighting. The code also applies to the interconnection between electrical power generation facilities and the electrical utility system, the demarcation of which is established between the generator and the electrical utility system. It also applies to high voltage transmission lines and electric distribution systems connected to the Alberta Interconnected Electric System that are designed under the care and control of a registered engineering professional experienced in the application of the code, and the design, selection of the equipment, and installation is documented by such a registered engineering professional. The Alberta Electrical Utility Code also applies to other objects located in proximity to electrical utility systems or activities conducted in proximity to electrical utility systems in such a way that the location or the activity may result safety hazards or physical or inductive interference. Existing installations which complied with the previous editions of the code at the time of their installation has been grandfathered and do not have to be modified to comply with the 5th edition of the code, except where the authority having jurisdiction has safety concern and requires a change to rectify that. The code also applies to communication systems which are owned by electric utilities for the purpose of the operation of the electric utility system. Other communication utilities fall under federal jurisdiction and are excluded from the scope of this code, but the clearances identified in the code for communication lines and equipment apply. The format for the Alberta Electrical Utility Code follows the same structure of the Canadian Electrical Code. It consists of 7 sections with even numbers from Section 0, Object, Scope and Definitions, to Section 12, Underground Utilities. It also includes tables, figures, and appendices A to D. Section 2 of the code includes general rules such as prohibitions, restrictions regarding entering facilities, maintaining safe distances, and clearances when working near utilities, building near utilities, or excavating near utilities, and other matters of general nature. Section 4 in the old editions of the code was used to include safety rules. In 2007 edition, for ease of reference, the safety rules were relocated to Appendix A. Section 4 therefore became not used thereafter. Grounding and bonding requirements for generating stations, substations, overhead and underground utilities, as well as for buildings, pipelines, fences, and other objects in proximity to generating stations or substations are explained in Section 6 of the Code. And Section 8 of the Code includes rules related to installation of substations and electrical equipment. This section covers rules related to working space near electrical equipment, safety provisions related to liquid-filled electrical equipment, guarding and protection of live parts, including substation switch yards, and circuit breakers, switches, and fuses. Requirements for overhead and underground systems are included in Sections 10 and 12 of the Alberta Electrical Utility Code. The code also identifies 2 standards from the Canadian Standards Association, which must be referenced by the code users for comprehensive and complete results. The reference standards are CSA Standard C22.3, number 1-15 overhead systems, and CSA Standard C22.3, number 7-15 underground systems. Appendix A of the code contains safety rules related to employers, utility employees, protective devices and equipment, safe work routines, limits of approach, work on energized electrical equipment or lines, electrical transportation systems, and tree trimming work near energized electrical equipment or lines. Appendices B, C, and D include notes and rules. So the electrical engineers and designers practicing overhead and underground utility power distribution systems design for utility companies or developers, and or practicing street and roadway lighting for utility companies, municipalities, or developers must be knowledgeable about the Alberta Electrical Utility Code, as well as the other codes and standards referenced in the Alberta Electrical Utility Code. That being said, we should also note that each utility company has their own standard details, equipment, approved manufacturer, and products that the engineers and designers must be familiar with. This will particularly become helpful when they are developing bill of materials for different utility companies or utility companies in different provinces. Similar to other codes we discussed in my last video, the Alberta Electrical Utility Code also makes references to applicable standards developed by other organizations where such standards sufficiently address the intended objectives of the code. Alberta Electrical Utility Code references standards from the Canadian Standard Association, CSA, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, and Underwriter Laboratories of Canada ULC, as listed in these slides. Such reference standards are reviewed prior to adoption and referencing to ensure their content is compatible with the code. Referencing them in the Alberta Electrical Utility Code has the effect of making the applicable provisions of that document part of the code. Simply put, the applicable parts of a reference document become legally binding pursuant to the provincial law, just as the code itself is. I hope you enjoyed our conversation so far and found it useful to your practice. Now let's discuss the other code I mentioned earlier, the Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities. The latest edition of this code is its 5th edition. It was published by the Safety Codes Council of Alberta in 2015 and was declared to be in force from January 1st, 2016 to January 31st, 2019. This code is adopted in Alberta and Saskatchewan and is referenced in British Columbia and Manitoba. It applies to electrical installations used in the search, transmission, and production of oil, natural gas, and related hydrocarbons. The Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities does not apply to electrical installations used in petroleum refineries, petrochemical facilities, gas distribution systems operated by a gas utility at a pressure of 700 kilopascals or less for the purpose of distributing gas to consumers in all or part of the municipality, and fuel supply systems for equipment. This code, as indicated in its scope, is supplementary to or a mandatory of the requirements of the CSA C22.1 Part 1 Canadian Electrical Code. As I mentioned earlier, the Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities has been discontinued and is no longer adopted in Alberta, for the Canadian Electrical Code Part 1 24th edition now regulates this work. For area classification requirements at oil and gas facilities permitted or constructed prior to February 1, 2019, the use of the Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities is permitted. For projects permitted on or after February 1, 2019, the prescriptive requirements of Rule 18-004 of the 2018 edition of the Canadian Electrical Code Part 1 shall apply. February 1, 2019 is the date from which the CEC 2018 was declared in force. The Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities provides area classification guidelines and includes articles regarding installation of electrical equipment, grounding, hazardous area classifications for common areas in oil and gas facilities, drilling and servicing operations, oil and gas wells, and water flood and disposal systems. It also includes appendices containing explanatory notes and rules, illustrative diagrams of area classifications, and engineering guidelines for determining area classifications. The Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities lists several information sources and references for use by professionals in developing area classifications. The code references resources from American Petroleum Institute, National Fire Protection Association, International Electrotechnical Commission, International Society of Automation, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and other expert publications. These two slides list such information sources and references. As a reminder to all of us regarding the importance of compliance with the codes, let's do a quick recap of what we discussed in the last video prior to proceeding to the summary slides. In brief, upholding the codes is paramount to maintaining public safety and welfare and the health and safety of workers and property. And the responsibility is with everyone involved, including facility owners, operators, designers, manufacturers. Now let's take a minute to summarize what we discussed today. In addition to the codes used by the electrical engineers and designers practicing building systems design, which we discussed in my last video, there are other codes used by electrical professionals practicing other fields of electrical systems design. Today we discuss the other codes that are important to electrical professionals practicing design for power distribution and or roadway and street lighting for utility companies, developers, and or municipalities, and area classification and electrical design for oil and gas facilities. These codes are also developed by the technical subcommittees of the Safety Codes Council pursuant to the Safety Codes Act mandate. These codes are the Alberta Electrical Utility Code and the Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities. The Alberta Electrical Utility Code is in its 5th edition. It was published in 2016 and was declared to be in force on May 1, 2017. It applies to construction, maintenance, and replacement of electrical utility systems that are used to transform, transmit, distribute, and deliver electricity to consumers' services, and street and roadway lighting. It does not generally apply to power plants and transmission lines. However, it applies to the interconnection between electrical power plants and the electrical utility system, and to high voltage transmission lines and electrical distribution systems that are connected to the Alberta Interconnect electric system and are designed and documented under the care and control of a registered engineering professional. The Code for Electrical Installations at Oil and Gas Facilities is in its 5th edition as well. It was published in 2015 and was declared to be in force from January 1, 2016 to January 31, 2019. It applies to electrical installations used in the search, transmission, or production of oil, natural gas, and related hydrocarbons. This code has been discontinued for the Canadian Electrical Code 2018, Part 1. The 24th edition now regulates this work for new projects. This code nonetheless applies to existing compliant projects and any project that received permit prior to February 1, 2019, as stated in Alberta Municipal Affairs Stand Data CEC-18 of February 2019. Where projects include buildings that fall under the jurisdiction of the Building Code, the codes we discussed in my last video may apply to the building portion as well. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and found it useful to your practice. Until our next meeting, be safe and healthy. Please take care of yourself and others.